I heard her before I saw her. Well, would you look at that? They let the mechanic in the front door tonight. Not to me. About me? The way you'd mention weather or traffic? Something mildly inconvenient, loud enough that three people near her laughed into their champagne. I stood just inside the ballroom doors of the Marriott downtown, in my one good sport coat, the same one I'd worn to my own wife's funeral, and I felt 67 years old in every joint of my body. My hands were clean. I'd scrubbed them twice before I left the house. Gotten the last of the grease out from under my nails with the little brush Marilyn used to keep by the kitchen sink. Didn't matter. The woman looking at me had already decided what I was before I opened my mouth. That woman was about to become my daughter's mother-in-law. I had one foot already turned back toward the lobby. I want you to understand that. 67 years old, and I was ready to walk straight back out into the parking lot like a boy sent home from a dance. Then I felt a hand on my arm. My daughter, Colleen, 29 years old, in a green dress her mother would have loved, leaned in close and said, "Dad, stay. I need you to trust me tonight. Just tonight." She didn't explain herself. She squeezed my arm once, hard, the way her mother used to when she meant business, and then she was gone again, back into the crowd, smiling like nothing had happened at all. I had no idea, standing there, what my daughter already knew. Neither did the woman who'd just called me a mechanic like it was something to be ashamed of. My name is Walter Doyle. Most people who've known me longer than 5 minutes call me Walt. I'm 67, and I've spent 44 of those years with grease under my fingernails, running Doyle's diesel and auto out on Route 9 outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania. The kind of town where the mills closed 30 years ago and everybody just kept going anyway because that's what you do. My father opened that shop in 1958. I started sweeping the floor there when I was 11, learned to change a clutch before I learned to drive, and took the place over from him in 1981, when his hands finally gave out from 40 years of turning wrenches. I never made anybody rich. I never wanted to. I paid my mortgage, I paid my taxes, and every single truck and tractor and school bus that came through my bay doors left running better than it came in. That's the whole resume. That's all I ever needed it to be. My wife, Marilyn, was a third-grade teacher for 31 years at the elementary school 2 blocks from our house. She had a way of looking at a person for about 10 seconds and knowing exactly what kind of trouble they were or weren't. I used to tease her that she should have been a detective instead of a teacher. She'd just laugh and say, "Walt, 8-year-olds and grown men lie the exact same way. I've just had more practice." We raised 2 children in that house on Birch Street. Our son, Michael, is 34 now, works for the county road department, married with 2 boys of his own out in Clark's Summit. And then there's Colleen, 29, sharp as a tack since the day she could talk, who went and got herself a nursing degree and works nights in the ICU at the regional hospital. Marilyn passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already made its decision. The night before she went, she held my hand in that hospital bed and said, "Our kids turned out good, Walt. Whatever else, we did that part right." She was gone by morning. I won't stand here and tell you I've made peace with it, because some mornings I still reach for her side of the bed before I remember. But Colleen started coming by the shop most Sundays after that, bringing coffee, sitting on the stool by my workbench while I finished up whatever was on the lift, and we got close in a way we hadn't been before, back when Marilyn was the one who did all the talking for both of us. About 16 months ago, Colleen came home from a nursing conference in Philadelphia with a man on her arm named Bradley Ashcombe. Bradley was a hospital administrator, the kind of man who talks about synergy and optimizing patient flow, and somehow makes running a hospital sound like running a hedge fund. His family was Ashcombe money, old mainline Philadelphia money, the kind that's been sitting in trust accounts so long it's forgotten it was ever earned by anybody. His father, Nathaniel Ashcombe, sat on the board of 2 hospital systems and owned a stake in a company that developed medical office parks up and down the eastern seaboard. His mother, Diane, ran a foundation that threw galas nobody remembered the purpose of by the following morning. The first time Bradley came to Sunday dinner at my house, he shook my hand like he was afraid my calluses might transfer onto his palm. Diane asked me what I did, and when I told her, she said, "How industrious," in a tone I've heard exactly one other time in my life, from a loan officer who was about to say no. I told myself I was being an old man, touchy and proud for no good reason. Colleen was happy. Bradley opened doors for her, remembered her coffee order, called her parents on Sunday to check in even when she wasn't around to hear it. I kept my mouth shut for a year and a half, the way you do when your child looks at somebody the way Colleen looked at Bradley. Then came the engagement party. The Ashcombes hosted it at their country club outside Bryn Mawr, white tablecloths, a string quartet, the whole production. I'd had a bad morning at the shop, a transmission that fought me the entire time, and I got there 20 minutes late, still smelling faintly of diesel no matter how hard I'd scrubbed. I walked in doing the best I could with what I had, same sport coat, my good shoes shined up the night before. And that's when I heard Diane Ashcomb's voice, low, meant just for the women standing near her. Well, would you look at that? They let the mechanic in the front door tonight. A ripple went through that little cluster of people. A laugh swallowed halfway. Somebody suddenly very interested in the flowers on the table. I saw Bradley's own aunt look down at her shoes. I felt my face go hot in a way it hadn't since I was maybe 14 years old. That's the thing about shame. It doesn't ask how old you are or how many years you've spent doing right by people. It just reaches back and finds the smallest, most humiliated version of you and hands you the keys. I had turned almost all the way around when Colleen's hand caught my sleeve. Dad, stay. Trust me. Just tonight. 4 words, same as before, and something in her eyes I'd never seen on her face until that moment, something steady and a little dangerous, so I stayed. I sat through that dinner making small talk with 2 of Bradley's cousins who turned out to be decent enough, actual people who asked me real questions about the shop and seemed to mean it. But every few minutes my eyes drifted to the head table, where Nathaniel Ashcombe would catch my gaze and hold it just a beat too long, the way you look at a bill you've already decided not to pay. After the party wound down, Colleen asked me to walk with her to my truck in the parking lot. She climbed into the cab beside me, shut the door, and sat quiet for a second, looking at her hands the way her mother used to, before she said something that mattered. Then she said, Dad, I need to show you something, and I need you to let me get all the way through it before you say anything. She pulled out her phone, audio files, more than a dozen, each one labeled with a date going back nearly 4 months. She pressed play on the first one. Bradley's voice came through, easy, relaxed, nothing like the careful, courteous man who'd been shaking my hand and holding doors for a year and a half. 2 months, tops. Once the wedding's done, I start the conversation about the property. Diane's voice. Unbothered as a woman discussing dinner reservations. And if the old man balks? Bradley, almost amused. He won't. Guys like that trust their kids completely. Once Colleen's my wife, he'll co-sign whatever I put in front of him. He'd sign his own eviction notice if she asked him to. I sat in that truck and felt the floor of my whole life tilt sideways. My shop, Doyle's Diesel and Auto, sits on 4 acres right where Route 9 meets the new bypass interchange. The state had quietly approved 18 months back, a project most of the town didn't even know was final yet. But Nathaniel Ashcombe knew. His medical office park company had already run the numbers. My little parcel of cracked asphalt and cinder block, worth maybe $400,000 as a working garage, was about to sit directly in the path of a development corridor that would make it worth $8 million to the right buyer. And Bradley Ashcombe had been engineered, by his own father, into my daughter's life as the mechanism for getting it. There were more recordings. There was more than that. Colleen had spent the last 6 weeks, ever since she'd overheard one conversation she wasn't meant to hear at a family dinner, quietly documenting everything. She had photographs of a preliminary purchase agreement sitting on Nathaniel's home office desk, my name typed on the seller's line, a signature underneath it that was almost my signature, close enough to fool anybody who didn't spend 40 years signing invoices the way I have. She had emails between Nathaniel and a development firm out of Philadelphia. She had the whole operation laid out in black and white, dated back to before Bradley had ever taken her to that conference. Colleen, I finally managed. What do you want to do? Part of me, I'll be honest, wanted to just call it off quietly, cancel the whole thing over the phone, protect what was mine without lighting a match under it in public. My father raised me on a simple code. You handle your business, you don't make a spectacle. But then I thought about Bradley's voice on that recording, so casual about signing away 4 decades of my life's work, and I thought about Marilyn and what she would have said. She never let anybody underestimate her without paying for it eventually. Let the truth breathe, Colleen, I said. I'm with you all the way. The next morning, Colleen introduced me to her friend Priya, who did audiovisual work for corporate events and conferences and had already agreed to help set things up. They'd arranged with the wedding venue, a restored old mill building outside Scranton, to install a small projection screen at the back of the reception hall, telling the coordinator it was for a slideshow tribute to Marilyn during the toasts. Nobody questioned it. Priya spent 2 days syncing the recordings to subtitles, sequencing them so there'd be no room for anybody to claim confusion later. I went home that night, put on my one good suit, the one I'd worn to bury my wife, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I thought about my father teaching me to bleed a brake line when I was 12. I thought about Marilyn's hand in mine at the end. Something in my chest went quiet and clear, not angry exactly, just certain. The wedding was set for 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon in October. I got there early and watched the room fill up. The Ashcombes side arrived first, Nathaniel in a suit that cost more than my truck, Diane in pearls, their whole entourage moving through the room like they owned the air in it. Bradley stood up front looking, to everyone else in that room, exactly like a nervous groom should look. I knew my daughter's fiancé well enough by then to see something else underneath it. A kind of quiet, practiced confidence. The look of a man who believes he's already closed the deal. Colleen came down the aisle on my arm. I want to tell you that walking my daughter down that aisle, even knowing what was coming, even with my heart going like a jackhammer, was still one of the finest things I've ever done in my life. She squeezed my hand once before she let it go. I sat down in the front row, next to the empty seat we'd left for Marilyn's memory, the way we always did at family things since she'd passed, and I held very still. The officiant welcomed everybody. There were the usual readings, a cousin who cried reading a poem nobody quite understood, and then the vows. Bradley Ashcombe, do you take Colleen Doyle to be your lawfully wedded wife? Colleen raised her hand before he could answer. Before you say anything, she said, in a voice that carried to every corner of that mill hall, without her needing to raise it at all, there's something everyone here has a right to see. The officiant blinked. Bradley's smile went stiff at the edges. And at the back of the room, the screen came to life. I want to slow this part down, because that's how it felt happening. Slow, like watching a car go into a spin you already know you can't correct. First there was confusion, heads turning, people leaning toward their neighbors to whisper. Then recognition, as Bradley's own face and voice filled that screen and those speakers. Then silence, the kind where an entire room arrives at the same understanding in the same half-second. Once the wedding's done, I start the conversation about the property. Diane's voice. And if the old man balks? Bradley's voice again, that same easy amusement. He won't. Guys like that trust their kids completely. Nathaniel Ashcombe was on his feet immediately. Turn that off. That's doctored. That's a fabrication. This is slander. But the recording kept playing. The second clip was Nathaniel himself, in his study, leaning over that same desk, telling somebody on the phone, the interchange gets finalized in the spring. That parcel is worth 20 times what he thinks it's worth. We need the paperwork signed before he finds out what he's sitting on. A sound moved through that room that wasn't quite a gasp. Something heavier than that. Two of Bradley's own groomsmen looked at each other and quietly stepped back from the altar. The third recording was Bradley and Diane, clearly caught in a hallway somewhere, Diane's voice low. I don't know how his daughter stands looking at that man in public. He smells like a gas station. Bradley laughing, soft and careless. Once we're past the wedding, we won't have to keep pretending to like the old man at all. Colleen didn't cry. She didn't shout. She stood there at the altar in her mother's old pearl earrings and watched the room understand exactly who Bradley Ashcombe was. Bradley tried. Those are edited, that's out of context. Somebody tell them. But nobody was listening to him anymore. His own aunt, the one who'd looked at her shoes back at the engagement party, stood up from her seat and walked straight out a side door. Then a man in the fourth row stood up, steady, unhurried, a man in his late 50s in a gray suit that said nothing loud at all. My name is Gerald Whitfield, he said. I'm an assistant district attorney for Lackawanna County. I was invited to this wedding as a family friend of the Ashcombes. He looked directly at Nathaniel. Mr. Ashcombe, what I have just witnessed constitutes evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud and forgery of legal documents. I'd strongly advise you not to leave this building. I thought about Marilyn in that moment. I thought she would have loved this. Nathaniel blustered. Diane's face went the color of dishwater. and Bradley tried once more to reach Colleen's arm, only to find two of her fellow ICU nurses, women built for exactly this kind of emergency, quietly standing between him and the aisle. Police arrived within 20 minutes. The Ashcombes were escorted out through the same lobby where I'd almost turned around and walked out 4 months earlier. Some guests filmed it on their phones. Others just stood there, stunned, holding their programs like they didn't know what else to do with their hands. Colleen found me in the thinning crowd. We stood together for a while without saying anything. Then she said, "The caterer's already paid, Dad. I'd rather celebrate than grieve." So we did. The DJ, who had absolutely no idea what to do with himself, eventually just started playing music, and the guests who'd stayed, which turned out to be most of them, ate the dinner that had already been prepared and danced anyway. I danced with my daughter to a song her mother used to hum around the house, and Colleen put her forehead against my shoulder for a second and said, "Mom would be so proud of both of us." I had to look away for a second at that, out toward the window, at the parking lot where my truck was sitting, at the whole ordinary world going on outside like nothing extraordinary had just happened inside. In the weeks that followed, Gerald Whitfield's office built the case with a lot more patience than I had left in me by that point. Colleen turned over every recording, every photograph, every email. Forensic document examiners confirmed my signature on that purchase agreement was forged. A careful, practiced forgery, but a forgery all the same. The investigation turned up something none of us had expected. The Ashcombe family fortune, the country club membership, the foundation galas, all of it was propped up on debt. Nathaniel had 2 outstanding civil judgments in other states already. Diane had run 4 credit lines to their limits. They needed my little 4 acres of cracked asphalt because they were far more desperate than anybody looking at them from the outside would ever have guessed. A woman named Renata Kolb reached out to us about 3 weeks after the wedding that wasn't. She'd been engaged to a man connected to the Ashcombe family business almost 6 years earlier, and the pattern had been identical. Pressure to combine finances, pressure on her father to co-sign a property transfer, then a sudden cold engagement. Once she started asking questions, she testified. 2 more people came forward after her, with similar stories once the local news picked it up. A settlement offer landed on our lawyer's desk before any of it went to trial. $275,000 and a private apology, in exchange for Colleen and me agreeing not to press charges further and to keep quiet about the rest. We sat with that offer for about 10 minutes at my kitchen table. Then I told our lawyer no, not because I didn't need the money, because Lord knows a shop like mine runs thin some months. I said no because Renata Kolb deserved to stand up in a courtroom and say what had been done to her out loud, in public, on the record. I said no because there would have been somebody after us too, if we let this one go quiet. The trial ran 9 days. The defense tried to paint Colleen as a jealous, controlling woman who'd fabricated the whole thing out of jealousy over Bradley's family money, which was, I'll grant them, a creative approach. It didn't have anywhere to stand. You cannot argue your way around your own voice on a certified recording. You cannot talk your way past a forged signature under a forensic microscope. You cannot claim it's all one big misunderstanding when 4 separate families from 4 different years describe the exact same scheme in the exact same words. Guilty on every count. Nathaniel Ashcombe got 12 years, Diane got 6, Bradley got 8. The judge said something in her closing remarks I wrote down on an index card and still keep taped inside my toolbox at the shop. She said the family had made a calculation, somewhere a long time back, that other people's dignity was cheap and other people's trust was a resource to be harvested, and that calculation was the exact thing that had walked them straight into a courtroom. Colleen still works nights in the ICU. She started seeing a fire captain named Danny about a year later, a man who showed up to their second date in his work boots, straight off a shift, and has never once looked at my hands like they needed explaining. They're getting married next spring, out behind my shop, under the one big oak tree back there that my father planted the same year he opened the place. Small wedding. 40, maybe 50 people, every single one of whom actually knows us. Here's what all of this taught me, and I didn't come to it easily. I earned it the hard way, same as everything else in my life. The people who work the hardest to make you feel small are usually the ones most afraid of what you actually represent. Diane Ashcombe didn't call me a mechanic because she thought it was some kind of clever insult. She called me that because she needed it to be true. She needed me small enough that what her family was doing to us could still feel, to her, like ordinary business, instead of theft. That's the trick shame plays on decent people. It convinces you the problem is something you did, some way you should have carried yourself differently, dressed differently, spoken differently, to have earned a little more respect. I'm here to tell you there was nothing to fix. The problem was never mine to begin with. What my daughter understood, standing at that altar with more composure than I've managed in my whole life put together, is that the truth doesn't wait around for the polite moment to speak up. It doesn't need the right room or the right audience. It just needs one person with the nerve to stand still and let it out. So here's what I want to leave you with tonight, not as a scolding, just something to sit with on your drive home or however you're hearing this. Is there a room somewhere in your life where you've been making yourself small so somebody else could feel bigger? And if there is, how much longer are you planning on staying in it? I'm 67 years old. I've got grease that never quite comes all the way out from under my nails, a shop with my father's name still painted over the door, and a daughter who calls me most nights just to talk. I get up before the sun most mornings. I work until my back tells me to quit, and I sleep just fine, because I don't have one single thing on my conscience worth losing sleep over. That's the whole inheritance I was ever chasing. That's all I ever wanted to leave behind. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Type a 1 if you think Colleen was right to expose the Ashcombes in front of everybody at that wedding. Type a 2 if you'd have taken that settlement money and just walked away quietly. $275,000 is nothing to scoff at, and there's no shame in saying so if that's what you'd have done. Type a 3 if you'd have turned around and walked right back out those front doors, the second you heard the word mechanic, and never looked back at all. I read every single comment, so tell me where you're watching this from, and what time it is where you are right now. Somebody out there is hearing this at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, and for whatever reason, this is the story they needed tonight. That matters to me more than you probably know. If this one landed somewhere real for you, I'd be glad to have you back for the next one. I tell stories like this whenever I can. Hit subscribe if you want to be here when the next one comes around. Real worth was never in a shiny suit or a clean office. It was in the hands that showed up year after year and did the work honestly. Somebody may call you small to make themselves feel bigger, but that's their fear talking, not the truth. Stay steady. Love the people who stay steady with you, and let the truth take its own sweet time to catch up. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, but the life lesson behind it is very real and heartfelt.